So good morning, everyone. I hope you're ready to dive into the numbers in the budget because we're going to spend the next hour or so doing that. Um, as always, we start with introductions, but I know both of you, Elizabeth and Ann, were on last week, so we'll skip those this time and just kind of start diving straight into the budget. When we look at the AmeriCorps budget, there's a few different items we want to start with. And the AmeriCorps grant has two main periods of time. The first period of time is your budget year, which is that 12-month period of time of your grant. Okay. So you have full funding for that 12-month period to help with staffing, program costs, member living allowances, etc. The second period of time is the program year, and that's really the time frame in which your AmeriCorps members serve their term. You as an organization design your program with AmeriCorps member terms of service that fall somewhere within that 12-month budget period. It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, 8 months, 10.5 months, whatever makes the most sense for your program activities that your members will be undertaking. I don't recommend that programs have members serve a full 12 months, and that's for a few different reasons. One is that members cannot serve beyond 12-month period, okay, in the same program year. They can serve multiple terms of service, but in the current term, if they're serving currently, they cannot serve more than 12 months. So if you have a member who signs on for a 12-month term of service, and I always use the example here, a few years ago, we had snowpocalypse here in Austin, Texas, where Amy and I are. And this is very different than Virginia, I'm sure, but the entire city shut. We had an ice storm and snow, and I had no running water for 5 days. Many people had no running water or electricity for multiple days. So AmeriCorps members, even if they wanted to, could not serve. Literally, the city was stopped. So if you're on a 12-month term of service with your AmeriCorps members and something like that happens, they suddenly have to make up a whole week of service within that 12-month period. You can't extend their service whatsoever. Okay. Versus if you have a member term of service for 11 months and something like that happens, you can extend the service term with an amendment to their member service agreement. So there's wiggle room there, unlike if you have a 12-month term of service. The other thing is, if you have a 12-month term of service, you're literally ending your members on like a Friday and starting your new core on a Monday. So there's no time for you to analyze what went well, what didn't go well, what you want to change or adjust, or finalize any last-minute recruitment. Okay. So it is fully up to you to determine your member terms of service. It's just something to think about. And like I said, I don't suggest a 12-month term of service. Right. And you could also have multiple members, like you could have half-time members serve 9 months, and you could have minimum time members serve 3 months during the summer. So you can have different terms of service or different lengths of service for the different terms of service in your program. The next two terms are program budget and grant budget. Okay. AmeriCorps, Amy likes to say this a lot. AmeriCorps is a people grant, not a money grant. Okay. There are limitations to the amount of federal dollars you can ask for, which we'll talk about in a second. So essentially, you will not be able to capture either ask on the federal side or the match side, everything you want necessarily within your grant budget. So I always tell programs to create your program budget. Write your budget for what you need to run a high quality AmeriCorps program, and then most likely your grant budget as a subset of that budget, the pieces of that budget. Okay, and that helps to keep the match low, because overmatching does not help you. It's not like you get extra points in your grant review, anything. So you want to keep your match at the percent, as close as possible to the percent required for your AmeriCorps program. Right, and we'll go into more detail on all of these items too. The next term is member service year, or you'll see it referred to a lot as MSY. The easiest way to think about this is in kind of the business and nonprofit world as full-time equivalent, or FTE, but the government does really interesting math here. okay? So you'll see the 7 terms of service listed on the chart, and then their MSY or kind of FTE value, along with the minimum number of hours those members have to complete in order to successfully complete the program and receive their education award. Okay, full-time's really easy. It's 1 MSY, 1,700 hours. 3/4 time, this is where the math starts getting kind of interesting. You would assume would be 0.75, but it's 0.7 and 1,200 hours. Half time is 0.5 and 900 hours. And then we start getting into long decimal numbers. And when you're calculating this, you have to use the entire decimal. Okay, so reduced half time is 675 hours and it's 0.3809524. And then it gets more interesting with the government math. Again, you would assume quarter time is 0.25, but it's 0.26455,027 for 450 hours. You have minimum time at 300 hours and our newest term of service abbreviated time at 100. And those also have long decimal numbers for their MSY value. Okay. Sorry, let me, y'all's lovely faces. Let me see if I can move y'all's lovely faces around a little bit. Okay, one thing to consider is in previous RFAs, Sir Virginia has recommended that applicants request a minimum of 10 MSYs and at least 10 members. Okay, this kind of go hand in hand. If you're doing 10 MSYs, it usually equates to at least 10 members, right? As I said, you are limited in the amount of federal dollars that you can ask for, and that amount is based on your cost per MSY. For the 25-26 program year, the maximum cost per MSY is $25,200. And this is where a lot of programs start thinking about things. You know, that federal side, you can allocate those dollars to whichever budget area you want. You could allocate it to staff salary, member living allowances, etc. But if you kind of start thinking about it, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Actually, I'll wait on that one. I was going to show you all a chart, but it's going to make you all dizzy going that far ahead. So we'll start here. So the minimum full-time living allowance for 25-26 for a full-time member is $20,400. Okay, so if you think about the living allowance at $20,400, you have to include FICA, you have to include healthcare, and you have to include workers' comp or AD&D. Okay, when you start adding all those together, you're like, wait a minute, that's going to be more than $25,200 for one member, and it is, right? That's not saying that those federal dollars, like I said, have to go towards the member pieces. It could go to other things. You can put those federal dollars wherever you want in your budget. But just to give you an idea, this is where we talk about where it's a people grant and not a money grant. So there's lots of costs that you as a program will have to cover that won't be covered by your federal dollars. Okay. In this chart here, it talks about cost reimbursement, which you all will be applying for, and I'll talk about those differences in a second. Full cost fixed amount, same amount, $25,200. And then you have two other grant programs. An education award program, they only receive $800 or $1,000, depending on some factors, per MSY, because these programs do not pay their members a living allowance at all. All their members only receive the education award. A good example of this is Teach for America. Teach for America also falls into that professional core piece. They only pay a living allowance, they only receive an education award, and Teach for America members are teaching in the classroom, so they receive the school district salary for their teaching. Okay, so they're a little bit different because they're a professional core. All right. All right, so let's talk about these different budget types. The first budget type, and this is the most common, is cost reimbursement. And through that cost reimbursement budget, the funds are utilized to pay for programs costs such as member support, operational costs, administrative costs. This program is available to programs whose design have a mix of full-time and less than full-time members. And for this type of budget, you have to do a full and detailed budget that outlines both the CNCS and grantee funds. In terms of the budget pieces, this is the only section you're going to really see this in. You're going to see CNCS a lot in the budget section. AmeriCorps rebranded few years ago, previous to their rebranding, they are the Corporation for National and Community Service, or CNCS. Legally, per the federal law, they are still known as the Corporation for National Community Service, or CNCS, but they've completely rebranded strictly as AmeriCorps. Because of those legal ramifications in the budget section of the RFA, you'll often see CNCS referenced still. Okay, so just think CNCS is AmeriCorps. All right. With the cost reimbursement budget type, programs have to meet the requirements for providing match, which we'll talk about later. What's nice about this budget type, it allows flexibility to use all the funds for allowable costs, regardless of whether you recruit and retain all of your AmeriCorps members. Right? Full cost fixed amount grants, these funds are paid out based solely on AmeriCorps member enrollment and retention. So brand new programs for that reason are not allowed to apply for this type of budget, okay? This budget type differs from cost reimbursement in the fact that it's not managed or reported by line items. You don't have to submit a full and detailed budget. Okay, it is available to programs with a mix of member terms of service, so full-time and less than full-time. And there are no specific matching requirements for this budget type. But the maximum awarded amount per member is, of course, less than what's required to fully support a member. So organizations with this budget type still have to raise additional funds needed to administer the program. Okay, these budget types have less reporting requirements because they don't submit a detailed budget. But like I said, this is only available for previously funded or recompeting applicants. Okay. We talked a little bit about this one. This is the last budget type, and it's an EAP, or Education Award Program. And these funds are paid out based solely on member enrollment. So it just provides a very small amount, that $800 or $1,000 to programs. The program can still have a mix of AmeriCorps members' terms of service. And it's similar to a full cost fixed amount grant in that it's not managed or reported by line items. There are no matching requirements. But if you select an Education Award Program budget, you're responsible for utilizing your own or other non-federal, non-AmeriCorps resources for the majority of your member and program costs, okay? As such, this one is not as common, but of course, these are viewed very favorably at both the state and federal level because they're very cost efficient. All right? So I just want to pause here to see if there are any questions so far. Any questions so far? All right. No questions?
I was going to say, I have all sorts of questions, but I'm not sure this is the time to ask. But
no,
I
go
just
for
want
it.
to check on the first one, the full cost fixed amount. Did you say they can get their entire grant regardless of whether or not they get as many members as they had hoped to recruit?
For the cost reimbursement, yes. Mm-hmm. So if you don't recruit and retain all your AmeriCorps members, you can move some of those costs around to different sections within the budget, you know, ensuring that they're allowable, reasonable expenses per the federal regulations, but you do have the option to move those around. Every state differs on their budget amendment rules and processes. At the federal level, AmeriCorps does not require a budget amendment unless you are exceeding 10% of your total grant budget.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And as Annalise said, budget amendments have to be approved by the commission. Mm-hmm.
I'll just pop in and say, yeah, we ask grantees to really be thoughtful before moving budget items around, just because we want to make sure that the budget is being used most effectively. And so it's not a good thing to rely on, but it is an option that makes cost reimbursement a little bit different than fixed.
And that's where one of the stumbling blocks I see with kind of programs that have been around a few years. I think it's really your budget when you create a new program is your best educated guess at that point in time. And I think it's really important in your continuation years, which would be years 2 and 3 of your grant, and years 4 and beyond, that every year the program looks at their budget, looks at their enrollment and their retention, right sizes the program if they need to, as far as, decreasing slots, decreasing costs, or increasing costs and slots, if available for them at that time. But really analyzing what's been spent and what wasn't spent, because I'm sure the commission, and I know at the federal level, they really do look at utilization of those dollars and the member enrollment and retention rate. Okay. Elizabeth, any other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So because like a full cost fix is not by line item, even if down the line you look to switch to a full-time fixed cost budget, you would still want to look at the various line items that make up a cost reimbursement budget, because that will help you understand everything that needs to go into an AmeriCorps program. I'm going to provide you some examples of expenses in the different budget areas, but I don't provide a sample budget because I think sometimes when people see a sample budget, it kind of locks in their thinking. And I don't want to lock in your thinking, because you really need to look at what do we as an agency in a program need to budget for to make sure we have a high quality AmeriCorps program. Okay. So the budget is broken up into 4 different sections: program operating costs, member costs, administrative indirect costs, and source of match funds. The largest section is your program operating cost section, and this has 9 different subsections. Okay, personnel expenses, personnel fringe benefits, staff travel and member travel, equipment, supplies, contractual and consultant services, staff and member training, evaluation, and other program operating costs. Right. So let's dive into each of these subsections a little bit more. The first subsection is personnel expenses. As you develop this section of the budget, there's a few things you need to think about. This subsection includes staff directly charged to your grant, and it can be your organization staff or your host site staff. Okay. You need to include the salary and effort percentage dedicated to the AmeriCorps program. And all of these individuals have to have a timesheet requiring allocated actual time for AmeriCorps duties versus any other projects that they're assigned. So they have to show, if they worked a 60-hour week, they have to show the amount of time put to AmeriCorps and the amount of time put to all their other responsibilities outside the AmeriCorps program. And any individual in this section also needs a national service criminal history check conducted, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So on each of these, for the most part, I provided an example at the bottom. So you'll see AmeriCorps Program Director, and in the budget, because the budget isn't necessarily looked at in conjunction with your narrative, I always tell programs the more information you can provide to the reviewers, the better. So in the personnel section, I like to have each position have a short job description in relation to their AmeriCorps duties. Okay, eGrants does not allow a ton of text in it, but you could put, for example, overall responsibility for program compliance, grant reporting, and program excellence. And then what you need to indicate is the number of people, the full salary. So like this example, 1 person at $60,000, and they are dedicating 90% of their time to AmeriCorps for a total of $54,000. It's important to note that fundraising time cannot be counted on the grant. So for example, as a former program director, I only charged 90% of my time to the grant because 10% of my time then was for fundraising or other duties. Okay. All right. The next section is the personnel fringe benefit. For each of the staff that you list in the previous section, you have the ability to include fringe. And allowable costs include FICA, workers' comp, retirement, unemployment, health and life insurance, etc. Holidays, leave, and other benefits are not included in the fringe benefits rate. You would just add them to the salary in the previous section. Okay. So for this, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can list the type of fringe benefits and cost benefits for each staff position, or you can provide a calculation for the total benefits as a percentage of the salaries to which they apply. If a the total fringe benefit amount is greater than 30%, then they do have to be listed separately and justified. So I've given you two different examples here. The first is where they're kind of broken out separately. And you'll see healthcare, the program director, and again, this has to go towards usage. So this program, the healthcare costs are $500 a month times 12 months times 90% usage for the program director, because only 90% of their time or their salary is being charged to AmeriCorps. This program also has two program directors at 100% usage. So then it's $500 a month times 12 times two staff equals $12,000. And then you would add those two together to get the total. Or you could do it as staff fringe benefit. $200,000 is the total salaries indicated on the grant times 25%, which is your fringe benefit rate. So it equals $50,000. So you have a couple options how you list it on your application.
Can I ask a question?
Totally.
So we have a grant where from a locality, and so when you say holidays, leave and other vacation benefits, so when people are keeping their time, so in that other grant we have, like you work in schools, so there's Christmas break, and we pay our staff like they get paid for Christmas break, even though they don't go to the school building. So when I'm figuring hours, I need to take out Labor Day, Christmas break, spring break, all of that kind of stuff. I need to pull that from hours our members are serving.
I'm not talking about members here. I'm talking for staff.
Well, and even for staff. Like if we
well,
have like federal holidays, like a staff
Right.
member's not working on Labor Day, so you're not gonna have a timesheet for Labor Day. So, and when I'm figuring my percentage of time spent working on the program, do I need to delete federal holidays? Like, is it that specific?
No, what we're saying here with holidays, leave, and other vacation benefits, they would not be included in your fringe. Some agencies have like holiday fringe rate.
Oh, okay. Oh, I got you. Okay.
Does that
Yep.
make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, the third section is staff travel. And in this section, you need to consider items like staff mileage to visit member sites, staff conference travel. You know, it could be lots of kind of different things within there. For this section, you have to indicate the purpose of the travel along with the calculation that includes itemized costs for airfare, transportation, lodging, per diem, ground transportation, whatever is applicable for the activity, okay? For mileage and per diem, you're going to use the current government reimbursement rate unless your organization's policy is different for these costs. So example, the current mileage rate for personal vehicles for the government is 0.67 per mile. But let's say your organization's policy that you apply across all your programming is 0.6 per mile. So you would indicate that that's your organization rate. You would put it in that line item just in parentheses so reviewers understand why it's different than the federal rate. Okay. You are required per Serve Virginia to budget for the program director training, which will take place in summer 2025. That's going to be summer 2026. I'm sorry. I'm a year. No, it'll be summer 25. Travel to Richmond, Virginia, including 2 nights lodging with mileage and per diem. So I provided an example here. Serve Virginia's program director training in Richmond, Virginia. We're going to do lodging at $200 a night times 2 nights equals $400 plus mileage, 300 miles times 0.67 cents per mile equals $201 plus per diem at $60 per day times 3 days equals $180 for a total of $781. Again, the clearer you can make it for the reviewers, like I tried to really spell it out. I have the subtotals there. I have things in parentheses to make it easier for the reviewers to understand how you're coming up with your total calculation. Okay, I'm pointing out some of the requirements for the Start Virginia RFA, but it's important that you review the RFA as things may change or be a little bit different than what I've noted here. Okay. For member travel, this is things like member mileage for special events, long distance travel for member training, or member conference travel. Members should not get reimbursed for mileage for going from their home to their daily service site. Okay, if they're going from one service site to another during the same day, then yes, they should receive mileage, but it's just like staff. You know, staff don't get mileage reimbursement for going from their home to their office and back. Okay, again, you're going to do the same thing in member travel as staff travel. You're going to put the purpose of the travel along with the calculation, including itemized costs for any items, and then you're going to use the government rate unless your organization rate's different. So here's an example. Member mileage for travel between service sites, 30 miles a month times 10 months times 5 members equals $1,500. Okay. The next section is equipment. In all my years, I've maybe seen 2 AmeriCorps programs list equipment, and the threshold has just increased, so it's probably even going to go less. Programs that list equipment are usually conservation corps, environmental programs, because they are buying trucks to transport crews of AmeriCorps members or vans. But it's defined as tangible, non-expendable personal property that has a useful life of more than 1 year and costs at least $10,000 per unit. Okay, it is limited to 10% of the total CNCS funds requested. A lot of new programs, I see them put like laptops or other computer equipment in this section. It does not go here because it does not meet that definition. It would go under supplies. Okay, which is the next category. So these are consumable supplies and materials, including equipment that does not fit in the previous definition of equipment that we just had. You are required to budget for AmeriCorps service gear with the AmeriCorps logo or describe how you're going to provide members with service gear without using grant funds. Members must wear the AmeriCorps logo on a daily basis, and AmeriCorps at the federal level prefers it via clothing, but it could be a name tag or a lanyard. Even if that's like the daily visible way for them to display their logo, most programs buy some sort of clothing for their AmeriCorps members to have. Okay. Excuse me, single items costing $1,000 or more has to be listed individually. So here's an example, program office supplies. For example, pens, paper, printer, toner, file folders, etc. $50 a month times 12 months equals $600. Okay. The next section is contractual and consultant services. So these are consultant costs related to your program's operation, but not for training or evaluation consultants. Those are in separate sections. Okay. An example is an operational program coaching support to assist in the development of forms, systems, and processes during program startup. You do have to list a daily rate for contractors, but there's no maximum daily rate. Okay, so for example, operational grant consultant support, consultant to consist with the development of a high quality operational program, $800 a day times 6 days equals $4,800, and the daily rate is $800. The next sections are actually broken up into 2 subsections, both staff and member training. The information's the same for both, so I just kind of combine them. For staff training costs, you're going to be training staff on program requirements and training to enhance the skills staff need for effective program implementation, such as program financial management, team building, etc. And for members, it could be any member training to support them in carrying out their service activities. So it could be consultants. The example I provide there is CPR first aid member training, and it's a fee for both the trainer and the supplies, and it's $75 a member times 20 members equals $1,500. Okay. If you are attending a conference, the travel for the conference will go under staff travel, but the registration fee with the conference would go under staff training. Okay. The next section is evaluation. As a brand new program, it's highly unlikely that you will have any costs in the evaluation section. These costs that would be included here do not include your daily, weekly gathering of data to assess your progress towards meeting your performance measures, which we discussed last week. This is really a larger assessment of your program impact, as well as an assessment of your overall systems and program design. Okay. Depending upon how you progressed within the AmeriCorps world, for example, if you are sent up at some point to the competitive pool, which is the national competition, you have both a competitive pool and a formula pool of dollars. The formula pool of dollars, which you all will be applying for, is the state allocated dollars from AmeriCorps, and the competitive is the national competition. If you are sent up at some point to the national competition, there are requirements around evaluation depending upon how long you're funded at that competitive level. Okay. Example here is contracted services for an external evaluator, development of evaluation plan, analysis of data, final report, and that's 25 days times 600 per day for $15,000. Okay. The last subsection in this area is other program operating costs. This is kind of the catch-all basket for everything else. Okay. You are required for 3 items in this section. One is national service criminal history check costs. I'm sure all of your organizations do criminal history checks, but national service criminal history checks are a very specific process that has to be undertaken through very specific vendors or databases. Okay, so it is very likely that even though your agency does currently do criminal history checks, your members will have to undergo additional criminal history checks, or your staff, in order to meet these federal regulations. Okay, so you have to budget for national service criminal history checks for all of your members, and then staff in the personnel section who have dollars allocated to the CNCS or grantee share. Okay. Basically, anyone who receives a salary, education awards, living allowance, or stipend, or similar payment from the grant. You are also required to budget for On3Learn e-learning courses for $300. You all currently have access to those courses, and we've been talking about those each webinar, and Serve Virginia requires you to budget $300 for those. And then you're required to budget 1.9% of your operating costs, which should be labeled commission support. Okay, this is a fee that the commission keeps to help in the administering of your application and your grant and supporting your program. Okay, other items that could be included here, and this is, I don't like this, and you'll see in parentheses I say not recommended, but it is listed in the national instructions, and it'll be listed most likely in the Serve Virginia RFA, but they do indicate office space rental for programs operating without an approved indirect cost rate agreement that covers office space. So you could do that. We are seeing more and more programs have cost findings around this area because they're not following the federal regulations or cost allocation plans around this. So I tell programs to steer away from this if possible. As a new program, you only have a 24% match requirement, so it's usually very easy to steer away from this. Other items you could include are utilities, telephone, internet, similar expenses that are specifically used for AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps staff and are not part of your program or your organization's indirect cost allocation pool. You can also include recognition costs for members. This is another tricky item to include because gifts or food in an entertainment and event setting are not allowable costs. Okay. The newest one that AmeriCorps has added is retention incentives or performance awards are allowable to the extent that they are reasonable, necessary, and allowable for program outcomes. They're tied to your program narrative. They're fair, consistently applied, and part of your organization's written policies and procedures. And then lastly, if expenses are budgeted and shared with other projects or activities, the costs have to be equitably prorated and allocated between those activities and projects. So for example, a copier. If you have an office with multiple programs and you have a copy machine, just because AmeriCorps uses that, AmeriCorps can't be responsible for the entire cost of that copier. Okay, that copier maintenance contract or whatever needs to be equitably divided per your cost allocation plan between the various programs utilizing it. An example for this section is National Service Criminal History Check for 45 individuals times $56 per individual equals $2,520. All right, that is section 1 of your budget, program operating costs. Any questions? I gave you a lot of information there. All right, then we will jump into section 2. Section 2 is much shorter. Section 2 is strictly your member costs. So this is living allowance and member support costs. That is it, only 2 subsections. In terms of the living allowance, you're going to indicate the requested number of members and whether your request is for members with a living allowance or without a living allowance. As we talked about earlier, if all your members do not have a living allowance, then you are an education award program and you only receive a very small amount per MSY. If you want to be a cost reimbursement grant, you can have all your members receive a living allowance, or you could have some receive a living allowance and some not receive a living allowance. You can have a mix. So for example, in my last program, we had full and half-time members who received a living allowance. And then we had quarter-time members who were coming into our agency as interns, social work and counseling interns, to finish their degrees. So we offered them the option to join the AmeriCorps program and receive the education award only. They did not receive a living allowance. So our program had a mix of both members receiving a living allowance and those not receiving a living allowance. Right? In terms of the member living allowance, the only term of service that has a minimum is the full-time. And full-time members are required to have a minimum of $20,400 living allowance for the program term of service. We are seeing more and more programs pay above that minimum to assist with recruitment and retention of AmeriCorps members. Every single term of service has a maximum total living allowance that you can charge to your grant. Okay. I often get asked, like, okay, you have we have half-time members. How do we figure out their living allowance? And many times what I will do, oops, sorry, y'all. Let me see if I can find my calculator to show you, is if we're looking at a full-time member position, there's 1,700 hours, and a half-time position is 900 hours. It's not exactly half, right? So it's 53% roughly. So to kind of keep it equitable, you could take 53% of the minimum living allowance or whatever living allowance you have, and your half-time living allowance could be $10,812. Or you could say, okay, full-time, half-time, we're just going to cut it in half. There is no right or wrong. There are no minimums for, like I said, any other term of service other than full-time. I just encourage you to think about it equitably between the different terms of service. Okay. The second section is member support costs. This includes FICA. AmeriCorps members are not employees per the federal regulations. They are members, okay? But it gets really confusing. This is where your HR department and your accounting department could get struggle, okay? Nothing against either of those departments, but those departments kind of like most of their things fit into nice, easy boxes. AmeriCorps does not fit into those boxes whatsoever, okay? So even though they are not employees, they still have FICA taken out, and you still have to do workers' comp. If you have full-time members, you have to offer health care. It does not have to be the same health care that is offered to your staff, because many times in an employee-employer relationship, the employee pays a portion, the the employer pays another portion. In terms of AmeriCorps members and healthcare, you have to cover the entire cost of it. Okay, but like I said, it doesn't have to be the same healthcare that you offer your staff. It just has to meet the minimal essential coverage of the Affordable Care Act. Okay, the core, if you are going to have full-time members, the core network, a lot of AmeriCorps programs utilize the core network insurance. AmeriCorps insurance, it's easy for the members to utilize and easy for the programs to administer. Okay. You do not have to include in this section the education award or child care benefit. Those are paid directly by AmeriCorps. For Serve Virginia, for the workers' compensation, you are required to budget $50 per member. Coverage is required for all members, regardless of whether they receive a living allowance or not, and their slot type. And it's administered by the Commonwealth of Virginia through VDSS and invoiced to the programs at the end of the program year. Okay. Any questions on the member section? Okay. The third section is the administrative or indirect cost section. Programs always struggle with this section. Okay, administrative costs are those general or centralized expenses of your overall administration. They don't include particular direct program costs. Okay, it could be like, I often use the example, your accounting department handles 1,000 people for payroll, and you have you have 15 AmeriCorps members. They can't delineate the time and effort that they're putting into payroll for your AmeriCorps members from the 1,000 other individuals that they're doing payroll for. So their time and effort would fall under your indirect cost. Okay, all this is going to go back to your financial policies and procedures and how you differentiate as your organization between direct and indirect. Because again, AmeriCorps, anything you do for the AmeriCorps program has to be across the board for all your programming. Okay. There's 3 different methods that you can calculate your administrative indirect cost for. It's the CNCS, or Corporation for National Community Service, fixed percentage rate, or a federally approved indirect cost rate, or a de minimis rate. Okay. The most common is the CNCS fixed percentage rate. Okay, this rate allows you to charge up to a certain amount without a federally approved indirect cost rate, without documenting support of the allocation. This is really strictly a calculation, and if you're audited for fiscal purposes for the AmeriCorps grant, they're not going to ask for documentation on your indirect costs. Okay, the maximum, no matter which of these 3 options you choose, the maximum that you can ask for on the CNCS side is 5%. Okay, and if you're a CNCS fixed percentage, the maximum you can ask for on the grantee share is 10%. Now, I mentioned in passing earlier that as a brand new program, your match requirement will be 24%. So you can allocate up to 10% of that 24 strictly in indirect costs, and then you only need to come up with 14 other % indirect cost. Okay, I think this section is very confusing for people, and many people calculate it incorrectly. So I've included the calculations here. You would copy and paste this into your budget worksheet and just add in the actual numbers. So for the CNCS share, for this fixed percentage, you're going to do CNCS section 1 total plus CNCS section 2 total times 0.0526. Now I said it was 5%, but AmeriCorps calculates it at 5.26% actually. Okay. For the grantee share, you're going to do not the CNCS column. You're going to do your whole section 1 total plus your whole section 2 total times 0.1%. These are both up to amounts. You can certainly request less than those up to amounts. The second one is if you have a federally approved indirect cost rate, you have to use this. Okay. Again, you can ask for 5% maximum on the federal side, okay, payable by AmeriCorps, and then you can recover the rest through grantee. So For the CNCS share, the calculation is exactly the same as we just discussed. The grantee share is a little bit different. You're going to take section 1 total plus section 2 total like we've had. Then you're going to multiply it by whatever your federally approved indirect cost rate that you're claiming is. And let's say your rate is 40%. You don't have to claim the full 40%. You could knock that down to 20% that you're claiming. Whatever you're claiming, you're going to multiply those two totals by the sum of those two totals, and then you're going to subtract whatever the total of your CNCS share indirect cost was. Okay, I know this is like, what is she saying? It's gibberish. Once you get in the budget, these calculations will start making more sense. The last one is for organizations if they choose the de minimis rate. This is for organizations that do not have a federally approved indirect cost rate and who receive less than $35 million in direct federal funding. If you choose to do a de minimis rate on your AmeriCorps program, you have to do it on all your federal funding and vice versa. If you've done it on a different federal funding grant, you have to do it on the AmeriCorps one. Okay, this calculation is very similar to the last one. It's just using 15% instead of a federally approved indirect cost rate. Okay, this is the least common one. The very last section of the budget is the source of match funds. All programs have to complete a source of match funds chart. The amount in the source of match funds, the total amount of the source of match funds has to match the total grantee share of your budget, like exactly. And I don't think I mentioned this, but eGrants does not accept cents, so everything has to be rounded to the nearest dollar, okay? For the source of match funds, you have to list the match description, the match amount, the designation if it's proposed or secured. You're going to select the match type, whether it's cash or in kind, and then the source, whether it's private, state, local, or federal. Okay. When I say match description, I'm talking like Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. Match is secured, it's cash, it's a private foundation, so it's private funding, and it's $50,000. Okay. When you do your budget, I'll pull up an actual budget worksheet. I will share this budget worksheet with you all when I share the PowerPoint too. Again, this just shows you the different sections of the budget. There are some notes of some requirements to the right here, but at the very top, you will see a CNCS share of your budget and the grantee share. The CNCS share is what you are requesting from AmeriCorps, the federal dollars you're requesting. Remember, you're held to the limit of $25,200 per MSY. And then you have your grantee share. This is everything that you're matching with. Okay. On this worksheet, it will auto calculate your cost per MSY. If you let's do 10 AmeriCorps members, and we're going to throw some money in here. So you'll see it'll turn red if you're over. So with what I threw in there, I'm at $50,000 per MSY. Okay, so it auto calculates that for you. It also auto calculates your match percentage. I have nothing on the grantee side, so my match percentage is 0. If I add something, then it's going to give me, it's going to auto calculate. You have your source of match funds chart that we just talked about down here, and you're going to select the various options. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Allergies are going crazy today. All right. So again, you're going to fill this out and you're going to allocate costs, the CNCS share or the grantee share. I always tell programs, put on the grantee side what you can easily get funded. Like if you can get member living allowances easily funded from outside sources, then put that on the grantee side. If it's hard to get staff funded through other sources, then put them on the CNCS side. Okay, when you're looking at what to put on what side of the budget. And go straight to that maximum of $25,200 per MSY. Lower than that doesn't help you necessarily in scoring, and you want to maximize the dollars that you're asking for. Okay. As we talked about, you do have a matching requirement. If you've looked into AmeriCorps before, just know that the rules have changed in the last year. So the current rules are, in the first 3 years of your grant, you have to have a 24% match. Every 3 years after that, it incrementally goes up until year 10, where it's maxed out at 30% match. Okay. Your match percentage is your total of the federal dollars you're asking for and the grantee dollars. Not super intuitive. Okay. Let's look a little bit closely at that maximum cost per MSY like we've talked about. So if we want to calculate, let's say we have 5 full-time members. What we want to do, and that's 5 MSYs, or we could even do this. We could say we have 10 half-time members. 10 half-time members is 5 MSYs. To figure out how much federal dollars I can ask for, you're going to take those 5 MSYs times 25,200, and that equals $126,000. So I have $126,000 federal dollars that I can put anywhere within any of these line items. Okay. But I can't exceed $126,000. Okay. Because then I'm going to be over my cost per MSY. The cost per MSY, the maximum cost per MSY, is not related to your living allowance. They're two separate things. A lot of people connect them, but they're not. Like I said, you can choose to put those federal dollars wherever you want. It doesn't have to go to living allowances necessarily. Okay. Because your match percentage only needs to be at 24%, we want to get as close to that as possible. Let's say in my example I just showed you on here, we were at a 50-50 match. If you put in a budget at a 50-50 match, you are held to that match percentage. You cannot spend down all your federal dollars unless you can meet that 50% match. So the lower your match, the better. Okay. So that might mean you have some $0 line items. For example, you will put the purpose and the calculation in your budget because you want to show that you're still providing these items to the funder, that you're still doing this. You're just not charging any of the dollars to the grant. You're using outside funding sources. So for example, and this is where that program budget comes into play. Remember I said you have your program budget and your grant budget's a subset of it. This would be an item you would account for within your program budget and list on your grant budget as a $0 line item. So this example is staff webinars and local training sessions, and the total is $1,000. And the last line there says costs covered by outside funding sources. And I have $0 in the CNCS share, $0 in the grantee share, and my total amount on the grant budget is 0. Okay. So again, this helps keep that match percentage down, but shows that you're doing these items within your program. Questions on that? Because that can kind of be confusing sometimes. And it's a newer thing that programs are utilizing. All right, so we talked about the maximum cost per MSY calculation. Let's talk about the match funds. We only have a few minutes left. Okay, you have to kind of back into what your grantee share total will have to be. So those first 2 bullets are the exact same we did. We calculated the maximum cost per MSY at $126,000. To determine the match requirement, you're going to take that $126,000 and you're going to divide it by 0.76. Because remember, our match percentage is 24%. And this gets you your total grant budget of $165,789. Then you're going to take that total grant budget minus the total CNCS share. And for this program, they need to come up with $39,789 in grantee share. Okay. For match, you can use a few different things. You can use cash, check, electronic fund transfers, credit card, payroll deductions. It could be from private donations, foundations, grants, corporate contributions. Federal funds, if you're matching with other federal funds, you have to have approval from that federal agency in writing. Okay, and you can never use AmeriCorps funds as match on other federal grants. And you could also have in-kind resources, non-cash contributions by third parties. It could be equipment, supplies, services like consulting services or training services, but it must directly benefit and be specifically identifiable to the program. And all your match has to be tracked exactly the same way as your federal dollars. It is a cost reimbursement grant, so you will incur the cost and then submit a periodic expense report or payment request to your state commission to reimburse you. So you will need to have enough dollars within your operating fund to support the program until that reimbursement occurs. Okay. State commissions differ on how frequently those reports can be submitted. But again, you have to have documentation for to support all the costs that you're submitting for reimbursement. And Annalise says at a minimum quarterly. Okay. No worries, Anne. Thanks for joining and have a happy holiday. The last piece, which we'll go through really quickly, is program income. And this is income including fees for service earned as a direct result of your grant-funded program activities during the grant period. The income has to be retained by the program and used to finance your program's grantee share. So examples of program income could be income from fees charged to registered participants for a workshop or conference, income from the sale of commodities, data, and information records or services fabricated or produced under the AmeriCorps program. The most common one is revenue received in return for providing AmeriCorps members services to a third-party entity, or what we commonly refer to as a host site fee. You're placing members in a school setting, and that school or that school district is providing you funds in return for that AmeriCorps member. That is program income. Okay. Program income you have to document, okay, and report on in your financial reporting. Programs can also not enter into a contract for or accept fees for services performed by members when the service benefits a for-profit entity, falls within a prohibited activity, and there's a list of prohibited activities AmeriCorps has, or violates the non-duplication or non-displacement provisions of the Code of Federal Regulation. Okay. Any questions, Elizabeth? Okay. Just a reminder, you have the resources. You have the Serve Virginia website. The RFA will be coming out in January. They will email you all. You have the On3 Learn applicant courses around the budget, and there's 2 staff courses also around the budget. So lots of different resources available for you.